Welcome to Orbitals, an astrology podcast. I'm your host, William Holloway, and today's show is all about Neptune's ingress into Aries. With me to discuss and dissect is my special guest, astrologer Vivian of Stars in Alignment. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get into it right away. What is Neptune in astrology?
I always think transcendent or ethereal because of that quality of disillusion that comes with Neptune, both from a spiritual or emotional aspect, but also even the physical and tangible becomes uh, a little less easy to contain.
Neptune dissolves boundaries. That's a thing you hear a lot of astrologers say, is that dissolving of boundaries. And then there can be a tendency towards escapism, confusion, and deception under Neptune as well, like a Neptune transit.
Definitely. And I, as a native with Neptune in the sixth, I have found that when pertaining to anything having to do with the body, like when we think of Mars, we think of things that are very embodied. And with Neptune, I think very disembodied. It's almost as if when I have transits affecting my natal Neptune, it's like a diagnosis that is questionable at best and then ends up amounting to nothing. But it causes this sort of deeper um, or more focused attention on something that is difficult to focus on.
Yeah, there's also like an element. Well, I have my sun is square Neptune. The first thing I think of is like, when your parents are like, "What are you looking at? Are you staring off into space?" Like, that thing where they like put their hand over your face and they're like, "Hello, is anyone in there?" That is Sun square Neptune. So there's also this kind of like this. It's like connected but also disconnected.
Absolutely. My son has it on the ascendant. So you just described like there's always this attention, and I'm not sure where exactly it is. And it always ends up being on something really fantastical. I've had other astrologers remind me of this all the time that Neptune can also um, draw our attention to that which is secret.
Ooh.
So, and I've thought about that a lot, like when you're looking at a chart, that if you find Neptune, it can indicate something that's secret and secret in a way that it's elusive to the native, even.
Mm. Yeah. Like almost other people can see it more so
Right.
than they can.
When I was first trying to understand the archetype of Neptune, I would listen to lectures and I would read about Neptune and I would walk away from it still not being able to grasp it. And I was like, oh, there it is.
Yeah, you did it.
Even
Exactly.
its power is so vast that even when we try to grasp literal words or things that we are seeing or listening to, that it eludes us in its own nature.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and because so much of Neptune, you can talk about Neptune in a way, and it'll often sound like you're talking about another planet. Because I've been thinking a lot about the connection between like Venus and Neptune. Like trends, for instance, are very Venus. But then when something just becomes part of the zeitgeist, that's very Neptune.
It absolutely is. And since we're talking about correlations, and we can return to this later, I pulled up the chart, the Neptune discovery chart,
Hmm.
and it was discovered conjunct Saturn in Aquarius at 25 degrees, September 23rd, 1846. And even though we think about those two planets as being like one is a limit and the other one is limitless, there are these weird parallels between the two of them. Specifically, I've been thinking because they've been co-present in Pisces that they both govern a certain amount of fear or anxiety. which you
Hmm.
wouldn't think would be attributed to a planet that's about timelessness and mysticism and beauty and glamour. But there is a weird parallel, especially with the traditional significations of Saturn, the ones that are very connected to the unseen or the mystical or what's beyond.
Right. Well, and I think that you said it right there. When you look at the way Saturn was viewed before, when Saturn was the furthest planet away, right? So in a way, Neptune adopted some of those significations once Neptune was discovered.
Yes.
I wrote this random note that made me, because it kind of shows the extremes of Neptune, which is I wrote, it's our capacity for hope and despair.
I really love that. That's beautiful. Yeah, and I think because we've been experiencing 14 years of it in Pisces, Pisces as this mutable sign that comes at the end of the zodiac, absolutely itself, and as the modern ruler of Neptune, even though I don't subscribe to that. I mean,
Me either.
Pisces itself is hope and despair. I think there is such an element of romanticism around tragedy that is so interwoven with the Pisces archetype that it becomes really evident now that we are at the anaretic degree of Neptune in Pisces.
We are. We're at the end of it right now, and it's really loud. It's
It
really,
really
really
is.
loud.
I mean, and it was sitting at that last degree, at the 29th degree, for such a chunk of 2024. And I remember talking to another astrologer. I actually think it was the Zine Witch,
Hmm.
who you know, and she was like, Neptune really needs to get off that last degree.
Yeah, we are seeing it. I mean, so let's talk a little bit about what we attribute to Neptune and Pisces the last 14 years.
I mean, as someone who works in a spiritual science and who also, I've been a yoga teacher and a practitioner for 20 plus years. We went from this place where spiritual sciences were fringe and now it's absolutely completely normal to be in an environment that we would consider conservative even and have people talking about mysticism as if it's a completely normal part of everyday life. And that was absolutely not the case 14 years ago. So I think if we're looking at the zeitgeist aspect of Neptune, we became spiritual people. We became mystics. We became shamans. And I use that word very, very loosely, but I think
Yeah,
and I'm not speaking for myself. I'm just thinking like, oh my God, if I hear one more person talking about, their ayahuasca journey or whatever, I'm like, this is normal now. People are going
yeah,
through and partaking in sacred medicine and then coming back and working like a finance job,
yeah,
That is the summation of 14 years. But in addition, I think accuracy, precision, and information have also crumbled and eroded.
yeah.
I'm thinking about the decay of journalism specifically over the last 14 years. And I
Hmm.
believe that our access to what is truthful has become less tangible, less easy, less visible as a result of Neptune and Pisces.
Yeah. I mean, people don't even know what to believe anymore. And it's gotten to the point where, I'll send an article to someone and that before they even read it, they're like, is this true? What does it say? Is it real? Like, I'm like we really gotta like people really need to care about their media literacy, like we
I'm
cannot be.
teaching my 11-year-old son about that because much different than my 11-year-old life. I mean, he has access to YouTube, and I had to explain, like, there are many wonderful things on YouTube, many beautiful artistic things, many silly things, but where is the source of the information that you're getting? Because it exists doesn't mean that it's true.
Yeah. I remember I used to have to say that to my grandmother before she passed away a few years ago, and she would say, "Well, why would they put it on the internet if it wasn't true?" I'm like, who's they? Like, that's the whole point. Anybody can put it on the internet. I mean, and that's also something that feels very, this Neptune and Pisces has been a lot about like anybody can do it. Everybody's invited. Everyone's can be part of this now, right? Which is cool, but now everybody's part of everything. Everyone's got a podcast.
Right. And there are so many podcasts that, you know, you do spend a bunch of time wondering, like, I have to check this information. Is this actually true? Like, what, I mean, one person's theory, very Neptune and Pisces, does not make it the reality.
Yeah, exactly.
What
Um,
else do you think?
well, something I was thinking about, like plastic surgery. Before Neptune and Pisces, it was not as socially acceptable to just get everything done without having to explain yourself. Now it's like people are going for a plastic surgery look, and that's just the way it is.
Tattooing as well,
Tattooing.
which is really interesting. I overheard a conversation between two people that were in probably their late 20s, and they were saying how, and I think this is how, when we start to see the transitions, right, between the signs before the transition happens, especially going from a mutable sign to a cardinal sign. But
Mhm.
I heard them saying, like, oh, it's not cool anymore, and that people were going to have laser tattoo removal. And I, being of a different generation, I said, good. I said, because it was a way of separating, or it was a way of separating from the crowd. Tattooing used to be something that like had rules and you earned. That's my very Saturnian nature coming in. And I didn't want to be like everyone else. Like, I didn't
Right.
care if it was cool. It was a way of distinguishing myself from the crowd.
Yep.
So the fact that, I mean, everyone is tattooed now. I mean, not everyone, but a lot of people are tattooed now, and it's very, very common. So,
Yeah, and you can have tattoos in the office, whereas you'd have to cover it up before. It was this whole thing about covering up tattoos. Now it doesn't matter. Now people can have purple hair in a very conservative office. I mean, I saw
right.
it myself. I was so shocked. It seems, I worked in a very conservative finance firm and for many years, and the change of what became acceptable in such a short amount of time um, was kind of wild.
Have you noticed trends in film or music that you think are associated with Neptune and Pisces? I've been thinking about that, and I don't know if I can quite pinpoint it, but
Well, I think that more like dreamy sounding things like pop music uses a lot of like ethereal, has used a lot of kind of ethereal sounds that are very like 80s and very like very mid-tempo. I feel like music has been so mid-tempo the last 14 years. And when Neptune goes into Aries, it's not going to be mid-tempo anymore.
no, it's not.
It's going to be punk and it's going to be fast and
It's going to
it's
be
going to be,
brutal. It's going to be rough.
yeah. Well, here's something that's kind of funny is that thinking about plastic surgery, I've been seeing a lot of stuff about trends in plastic surgery in the next year about like men getting like stronger chins, more of a jawline, getting these manly looking plastic surgery procedures, which is just kind of hilarious to me.
I mean, I saw a very interesting article that was talking about both plastic surgery and aesthetics having been a tip off to what was going to happen with the American election, that things had suddenly started to become more conservative, and we were going back to this very patriarchal thinness in women, and like universally blonde hair color and things being like shifting from what we saw a couple years ago. And they said that that would have been an indicator as to how the election would go.
Interesting.
Again, the transition between Pisces, which is very inclusive and very forgiving and very um, accepting and all encompassing, to Aries, which is far more, I don't know, direct.
Yeah, more direct. So, Neptune and Aries, the last time was from 1861 to 1875. The Civil War broke out just hours before Neptune entered Aries on April 13th, 1861. Now, initially, there was a lot of enthusiasm, actually, and romanticism regarding the war on both sides, which is something I was not aware of.
I heard that the people would were spectators, that they would get
Yeah,
on a blanket and watch
yeah,
battle, which is wild and also very, very Aries.
yeah. But that actually didn't last too long because the horrors of war became apparent eventually, with the birth of like photojournalism, and battlefield photography really took off
I
during the
remember that.
war.
I've actually, I have a friend who has a photograph,
Oh, wow.
like, and it looks on the surface very serene. And
Hmm.
he said, this is the location where the most human bloodshed has occurred during a battle in US history. And you can't tell in the photograph, but it was one of the earliest, I think, color photographs that were taken.
Some of the images, like I cannot even imagine, photography being so new.
Like, so what were people going out with their crazy like cameras and hoods in the
Yeah,
middle of all this and just taking photographs? That's so wild.
it's so crazy. Yeah, it's so crazy because it's a whole production. But yeah, the other thing, well, mediums gained widespread popularity because people were trying to reach their dead ones, that died in the war. So, spirituality, mediumship, seances, all that stuff it
That was
became,
during Neptune and Aries, huh?
yeah. Well,
Oh, wow.
it was popular. Spiritualism became a thing during Neptune and Pisces, but it became more mainstream in Aries, which is interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah, because they were
Well,
doing seances in the White House during the Civil War, which is
that's,
crazy.
I mean, it is comforting to know that, because I think in the back of my mind, I always wait for there to be a certain amount of pushback. And I do, and I don't want to involve Saturn too much in this conversation, but I think with Saturn and Neptune going to be a theme for 2025 and 2026, there is going to be this divide between science and religion.
Yes.
And I think, like, I always in the back of my mind, I'm concerned about pushback or censorship.
Me too. Me too. At the very least, maybe, what we'll see is like the fakers being a little bit more exposed. You know what I mean? Like,
Fine with me.
fine with me. I mean, some of these hot takes I see on threads sometime, I'm just like, what? Where did this come from?
I know. It,
Like,
it I have to scroll past because a lot of it is just really painful, and a lot of it is meant to sort of garner attention. Um, but again, people aren't really concerned with rules and history and what's true.
right.
There's like, and even the nature of you know short form written word is like something satisfying that I can walk away with, and people aren't really certain of whatever they're walking away with being rooted in any tradition. So I hope that there is some fact checking that occurs with Neptune and Aries.
I hope so too.
So,
Uh,
Civil War photography.
Civil War photography. Another thing that became really popular were outlaws. That's when outlaws really captured the public's imagination. The idea they were all kind of looked up as heroes, a lot of them, especially some of them like
That word is very Neptune and Aries.
yeah, yes. Heroic. Yeah, that's That's something that, yeah, we'll have to explore a little bit here in a sec, because the types of heroes that people are idolizing, right? That's something people need to be mindful of. And we've already seen it, with Luigi a bit.
Yes.
We're going to see more of that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's a couple of things that happened was the first American football game was played, and the first professional baseball game, the Red Stockings, was played, which is
Amazing.
perfect, Neptune and Aries. So there's been a lot of sports, like big things of sports that have happened with Neptune and Aries. A lot of the books that came out at that time were like all of Jules Verne's big books that were all about adventures, and um, Alice Adventures in Wonderland that came out during this time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then Mark Twain was writing Adventures of Tom Sawyer. It didn't come out till Neptune left Aries, but while he was writing it, he based the character of Tom Sawyer on a firefighter that he met in San Francisco who had rescued 90 people from a shipwreck. This like heroic, just
Yeah.
feel very Neptune and Aries type figure. The Impressionist movement was born during Neptune and Aries, which was all about visible brushstrokes, accurate depictions of light, paintings that kind of movement feel to it, which is very Aries movement.
Yeah.
What was funny is that they were criticized at the time for looking unfinished, which also feels very Aries.
It does.
Rise of Impressionism could be seen in part as a response by artists to the growing influence of photography, because they were afraid that it was going to diminish the value of artistic skill in capturing reality.
Very aligned with what we're dealing with AI.
Right, exactly. So
That's
anyway,
really
I just
well.
thought all of those things felt pretty interesting, and how we can apply that to what's happening now. There's obviously, what is it, the saying, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. So, I think we'll see echoes of some of these things in a more modern way.
I've been thinking a lot about the shift because we're like, so what does the zeitgeist look like? And I think when we're thinking about Neptune, which we talked about, but in the sign that is the temple of Mars and the exaltation of the sun, we're looking at martial and solar expressions of the zeitgeist. And as much as it's scary, right? This year has been very scary because we are moving into so many unknowns. But I think there are quite a few noble and positive aspects to things that are both martial and solar that are absolutely necessary at this moment. So, yes, it's still worrisome to think that the last time Neptune was in Aries, we had a war on US soil. But it's also inspiring to think that these art forms were created and that there were seances being hosted in the White House, which I did not know until that moment. That's really
Yeah.
cool. I like thinking about the solar qualities
Mhm.
of a Neptune expressed in that direction. That's like consciousness, spirituality, the active or directive principle, spirit.
Yeah. And being heroic, what does it mean to be heroic? Or what does it mean to fight for something you believe in? And I think we're going to be seeing a lot of that in different ways, both in physical ways, maybe, in uh, protest ways, in artistic ways. Like you said, as scary, as freaky as it may seem when you look at some of the significations, I think it's definitely needed. We need a fire under our butts, literally, to get us moving and get us out of this Neptunian fog that we've been in Pisces.
I mean, and there's a very initiatory quality to Aries. So if things have felt, you know, formless or like we've been stuck or stagnant, I mean, Aries as an archetype is the opposite of stuck or stagnant. It's like the idea of beginnings, even if they're not, if we don't follow through to completion, there's this inspiration that I think will give us a certain amount of life that maybe has seemed absent.
Right. Or give us a running start.
Yeah, yeah.
Neptune and Aries, the next 14 years, which technically, so Neptune goes into Aries March 30th and will be there until October 22nd, where it'll retrograde back into Pisces,
That
which is,
lovely 29th degree that we haven't spent enough time on.
yeah, we're going to really want to come back to it, I'm sure, right? Who knows? We might want to break.
We
I don't
might
know.
want a little bit of cleanup. We might want some relief, but I don't know. I mean, I think I think those two signs are so drastically different. Like the
Yeah,
beginning of the astrological new year, of zodiacal spring, as opposed to a sign that's definitely, I don't think it's talked about enough, that Pisces is like this infinite ending.
right. Saturn and Neptune are going to be meeting up. I don't believe they really will conjunct until next year, but they're going to come really
Correct.
close, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll be engaged,
Yeah.
but it's not an exact conjunction until 2026. The one thing that I didn't say when I was talking about they were discovered in a, well, Neptune was discovered conjunct Saturn, is that, and I'm not a modern astrologer, but in the scheme of modern astrology, Neptune and the 12th house are conflated. And the 12th house is the joy of Saturn. And I think it's almost like like a battle between a secret and what we have now uh, found to be true. And that's so very 12th house, joy of Saturn, secrets, things being culled from the unconscious. And
Hmm.
I do think the longer those two are close together, there will be this discovery of or examination of that which is buried in the subconscious or has been a secret.
Yeah, totally. The other part of this is that no living astrologer knows what it's like for Neptune to be in Aries. Like we haven't had that experience yet. We know what a Neptune Saturn conjunction looks and feels like
Yeah, the last Saturn Neptune conjunction was in 1989 in the sign of Capricorn.
right
You know,
around the fall of the Berlin Wall.
oh, interesting. Yeah, but I mean, many astrologers were born after 1989. I am not one of them,
Yeah, that's true.
but
Me either. Me either. Me either. I think looking for those like hero archetypes, be mindful of what you deem a hero, I think is something that we all have to be kind of
yes, and I think
watching.
there will be a lot of glamorization of when we have Neptune in the chart. It can be a place where we put things on a pedestal, and if we're thinking about Aries as an archetype, I think there will be an unfortunate um, focus on things that are deemed strong or masculine, and that could, it could be really wonderful that we're looking at the strength of humanity, but it could also point towards the idealization of that which is toxically masculine, or that which is brutal or bullying even.
Yeah. We're probably going to see a bit of all of that, all of it, all the things that we've talked about.
I really like the idea of the cultural zeitgeist being interested in beginnings
Hmm.
because of the zodiacal year, because of the fearlessness associated with Aries. I mean, it's also foolhardy, but it still points us towards beginnings. And I think we have to collectively look at shifts as being, as also carrying the optimism of beginnings, as well as the things to be wary of or cautious of.
Yeah. And we need to be comfortable with starting fresh on a lot of things. We see a lot of people, especially in politics, the Democrats, maybe more centrist, will
Yeah,
be like,
yeah.
well, we just need to go back to this. I'm like, no more back to anything. None of that works anymore. There's no going back. There's nothing to go back to. All right. So, would you like to introduce yourself and talk to me about your practice? What you've got going on? You have the floor.
My name is Vivian. I go by stars in alignment. I am a practicing astrologer. I do some freelance writing as it comes my way, but really primarily, I love doing client readings. I do astrology readings that are rooted in the Hellenistic practice, but my background, as most astrologers, was in modern archetypal astrology. So I definitely weave some of that in there. And I also incorporate tarot. I have a pretty insular, not fancy practice, but I do love counseling people and I love one on one readings.
Awesome. Yay. Well, and I love your presence on social media and everything you have to say about astrology. I'm always in agreement with your takes on everything. And yeah, so
Thank you, thank you. And I am, if anybody's interested, I am looking forward to hopefully this year branching out into more of a YouTube channel and possibly a podcast of my own because I think I'm starting to need more time than I'm granted on social media.
I hear that. I hear that. Well, are you ready for this Wheel of Fate?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. So this is the Wheel of Fate. We're going to spin the first wheel. It's going to give us a random planet. And then we're going to spin another wheel. That's going to give us a sign. And then we're just going to talk about all the first things that pop in our minds. All right, here we go. Oh, oh,
Oof,
Uranus.
oof.
God. We got Uranus last time too, actually, not
Did
cousin.
you?
Yeah. So Uranus in Uranus in Aquarius. Well, in modern astrology, Uranus rules Aquarius. That's the first thing I thought of. I don't see it that way, but
Yes, I don't see it that way either, but there are parallels. We can definitely see the electric quality of
mhm.
Uranus when we are talking about Uranus in Aquarius.
Uranus in Aquarius. The last time that happened was 96.
Interesting. I remember that year.
Mm-hmm.
96. It's
96.
funny because when you spun the wheel and it landed on Aquarius, the first thing that I thought of was the internet. And then I thought of cell phones. And
Mm-hmm.
then I also thought of, have you seen that documentary about mushrooms and the mycelial web? Why can't I think of
Yeah.
the documentary?
It's on Netflix, I think.
Fantastic fungi, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like those were the images that popped into my head when I thought Uranus and Aquarius. Um, because Aquarius is it's I feel like in and of itself, it's its own separate zodiac.
It is. It really is on a planet of its own in a lot of ways.
And I think, and here's where I think the Saturn rulership makes more sense to me because I always think of Aquarius as the outlier. And then Uranus being the Promethean character, the groundbreaker, like, but yet somehow associated with the collective. I think a quantum leap in how we communicate with one another or how we are connected to one another. And so that's why I thought the internet and then also
Hmm.
mushrooms.
Yeah, exactly. It makes sense. I mean, well, this would have been when people were getting internet and computers becoming much more common in the late 90s, and cell phones were becoming more common slowly but surely as we got into the 2000s.
Right?
Changing the way we communicate really quickly, changing the way we use technology. All of that was happening very fast. And it's just also kind of funny that let's see, Y2K would have happened during this time.
Yes,
And
it was. Yeah.
yeah.
I remember being at my parents' house and him having AOL dial up and just chatting with people on the internet, which I would never do the way I would never do now the way that I did then. But I think it was the beginning of chats, and it was like I actually like I dislike using the term the collective
Hmm.
when talking about Aquarius, but I mean it does fit. It does have to do with sort of the hive mind
Hmm.
and Uranus revolutionizing what is the hive mind? How are we connecting? What is a faster and more efficient way of taking that which is separate and unifying it?
Yes. I love that. Another thing with Aquarius, I always think of Aquarius moons. People with Aquarius moon, they often have like their own rules that they live by.
1000%. I dated an Aquarius moon for almost 5 years.
Oh, really? What I find with me, sometimes it's like that's the way you do things, and that you think that's the way everyone does them, but that's the way you do it, right?
Right.
Um, but often the way they do things, and you're like, well, just gonna do it the way I do it, and then come to find out the weird way they do it actually makes sense in some kind of way. That is a thing I
There
know.
is an efficiency and
Yeah.
like, yeah, there's something that absolutely, and now I mean, that innovates a task or an idea. And here's where the modern correlation tracks, right? This
Hmm.
idea of innovation and not being part of an established way of doing something.
Yeah. Yeah, and you touched on something that I hadn't thought of in a while, which was, it's planned out. It's like really thought out, and in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, it's more thought out than maybe other ways people are doing stuff. It's because
It's fixed.
yeah, it's fixed. Exactly, literally.
Very much a parallel with what we're dealing with now in terms of of you know a planetary archetype that disrupts and shakes things up, expressing itself through a sign that really doesn't enjoy things being shaken up or changed. The fixed signs really resist that idea of innovation, but yet still are able to do it in a way that allows it to be carried through with longevity. There's the Saturn part of it.
Hmm. Yep, there it is. Awesome.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
1996, huh?
1996. So till 2004. Yeah, I mean, things changed a lot in that amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, thinking of that, like end of the 90s, and then like the first thing that I thought of when you said it ended in 2004 is the Twin Towers fell in there.
Yeah,
Y2K, the Twin Towers.
shocking events.
Yeah,
Because that's the thing with Uranus, that something can be one thing 1 minute and then completely different the next is very Uranus.
it is. The disruptive quality of Uranus.
Yeah,
Why I said woof when you landed on
I
Uranus.
know. If it does Uranus the next game I play with someone, I'm gonna have to pick a different. I'm gonna say we're doing that again. We don't. I can't do Uranus 2 times in a row. Or maybe it's a message. Maybe that's something to do with, I don't know, telling me
But
something.
I think of all of the planets too, it's the one that is pronounced the most differently by different astrologers, right?
Yeah.
I, I hear Uranus a lot.
Hmm. How do I think I say Uranus.
I say Uranus too.
Yeah.
I feel like people that aren't astrologers also say Uranus too. And I live in Chicago, so that very nasal,
Oh
very
yeah.
sharp A ends up in a lot of words that you would rather it didn't.
Thank you, Vivian of Stars Alignment, for being my guest astrologer today. This was a lot of fun.
I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to more speculations after we had our first after we have our first little ingress of Neptune into the sign of Aries. We'll see.
Yeah, I'll have to have you back after we've had some time with Neptune and Aries and we can
Yeah,
see.
we can observe and make some educated guesses about what 2026 might look like.
Yeah, let's do it.
All
Awesome.
right. Thank you.
Thank you.